Washington State is famous for its massive mountains and millions of acres of dense, towering pine forests. It's breathtaking, but it's also the perfect place to vanish without a trace. Today, we're covering the 10 most mysterious disappearances in Washington State history, cases that completely defy logic and leave investigators baffled. If you love dark mysteries and the unexplained, please hit that subscribe button and like the video. Now, lock your doors, pull the curtains, and let's get into it. Interstate 5. If you've ever driven through Washington State, you know this road. It's not some forgotten back highway cutting through nowhere. It's the artery, the main vein. Tens of thousands of cars every single day, bumper to bumper during rush hour. Truckers hauling freight between Portland and Seattle, commuters sipping coffee and half listening to morning radio. It is one of the most surveilled, most trafficked, most visible stretches of asphalt on the entire West Coast. And on May 20th, 2016, a black 1996 Chrysler Sebring drifted across 3 lanes of active high-speed traffic on this highway, with no one behind the wheel. No driver, no passenger. Just a ghost car grinding against the concrete divider and shuddering to a stop while hundreds of commuters slammed their brakes and grabbed their phones. But here's the thing. Everything that belonged to the car's owner, his wallet, his driver's license, his debit card, $25 in cash, his cell phone, his keys, even a water bottle, all of it was sitting right there inside the cabin, untouched, like he'd just stepped out to grab a coffee and was coming right back. He never came back. His name was Logan Schindelman, and to this day, nobody can explain what happened to him. Let's back up. Tumwater, Washington. It's a small community just south of Olympia, the state capital. Not rural exactly, but not the big city either. It's the kind of place where you know your neighbors, where high school football games are a legitimate social event, where the local diner knows your order. It sits right along the I-5 corridor, so you're never more than a few minutes from the roar of highway traffic, but the neighborhoods themselves are quiet, suburban, safe. Logan Drew Schindelman grew up here, raised primarily by his grandmother Ginny, and by all accounts she did a remarkable job. Logan was a star, football player at Tumwater High School, big social circle, the kind of kid everybody in town knew by name and liked. He was 19 years old, 6 feet tall, 160 pounds, with dark hair and brown eyes and a smile that, according to people who knew him, could light up a room. But the year before he vanished, something shifted. Logan had gone off to Washington State University, and it didn't stick. He flunked out after his freshman year and came back to Tumwater, picking up odd jobs, trying to figure out his next move. His family noticed the change, but he was quieter, more withdrawn. He'd started smoking marijuana heavily, and it wasn't the casual social kind of use. It was chronic, daily, and it was making him paranoid, jumpy. Friends and relatives also noted he was struggling with something deeper, an identity crisis tied to his mixed-race heritage in a community that was overwhelmingly white. He was a young man caught between worlds, and the ground underneath him was getting shakier by the day. But even through all of that, yet he stayed close to Ginny. He talked to her. He came home. He was still there. Until the morning of May 19th, 2016. That morning, before Ginny left for work, Logan said something unusual. He was visibly anxious, nervous, pacing, and he told her he'd just had an epiphany. That's the word he used. An epiphany about his life, about himself, about something he needed to figure out. Ginny, being the kind of grandmother she was, told him that was wonderful. She said they'd sit down that evening and talk about it properly. Logan agreed. She went to work. She never saw him again. Now, think about that word for a second. Epiphany. That's a heavy word for a 19-year-old kid to use over breakfast. It's not, I had a weird dream, or I've been thinking about stuff. An epiphany implies a sudden dramatic realization. Something clicked, something fell into place, or fell apart. Was it a psychological breakthrough? A moment of clarity about his depression? Or was it something else entirely? Did he realize something dangerous? Did someone tell him something that terrified him? We don't know. We'll probably never know. But that single word is the hinge this entire case swings on. What we do know is what his phone did next. After Ginny left, Logan got in his black 1996 Chrysler Sebring and started driving. Cell tower data shows his phone pinging off towers up and down the I-5 corridor for hours. North. South. North again. No destination, no pattern, no stops at a friend's house or a store or a gas station. Just driving. Back and forth along the same stretch of highway like a man trapped on a loop or a man trying to outrun something he couldn't name. By evening, Ginny came home expecting to have that conversation. The house was empty. Logan was gone. He didn't come home that night. The next morning, May 20th, things got stranger. A woman commuting to work on I-5, southbound, somewhere near exit 95, spotted Logan's Sebring parked on the shoulder. She noticed it because she noticed him, or at least, she noticed a man matching Logan's general description standing outside the car. But he wasn't alone. There were two other men with him, white guys. One was tall and thin with a blonde bowl cut. The other had shoulder-length blonde hair. They appeared to be having some kind of interaction with Logan near his vehicle on the side of a busy highway at the crack of dawn. Who were these men? Nobody knows. They have never been identified. They have never come forward. Hold that image in your mind. We're coming back to it. Now. 2 p.m. that same afternoon. 911 dispatchers start getting flooded with calls. Multiple drivers are reporting a black Chrysler Sebring drifting. Not speeding, not swerving aggressively, drifting slowly and eerily across the active lanes of I-5 southbound near milepost 92. The car is moving like no one is steering it. It slides across one lane, then another, then a third, and finally scrapes into the concrete center median and grinds to a halt. Witnesses pull over. A truck driver, sitting high up in his cab with a clear line of sight down into the car, sees something that makes no sense. As the Sebring comes to rest, a figure, a white male with brown or reddish hair, throws open the passenger side door, jumps out, and sprints full speed into the dense tree line bordering the highway. Let's stop right there. A white male with brown or red hair. Not a biracial man with dark hair and dark eyes. Not Logan. So who was driving Logan's car? Or more accurately, who was sitting in the passenger seat of Logan's car while it drifted driverless across a highway? And if this man was in the passenger seat, where was the driver? Think about the physics of this for a second. A car doesn't drift across 3 lanes of interstate traffic on its own unless nobody is controlling it. If the mystery man was the passenger, that means either the driver's seat was empty, which means the car was already a ghost car before it hit the divider, or someone was in the driver's seat and simply stayed. But when authorities reached the vehicle, the cabin was empty. No driver, no passenger, just Logan's entire life sitting in the center console, wallet, ID, phone, keys, cash. If Logan ran away, he ran away with nothing. No money, no identification, no phone, no way to contact anyone, to buy anything, or prove who he was. You don't start a new life as a penniless ghost. That's not how running away works. And if Logan didn't run away, if something happened to him, then who were the men in his car? And what did they do with him during those missing hours between the morning shoulder sighting and the afternoon ghost drift? It gets worse. That same evening, after detectives had already impounded the Sebring, an unrelated report came in. Someone called to say they'd seen a completely naked teenager running through the woods in the general area where the car was abandoned. Naked in the Pacific Northwest timber. In May, when evening temperatures still dip into the high 30s, Thurston County deputies deployed tracking dogs, cadaver dogs. They swept the tree line along the highway. They found nothing, no footprints, no clothing, no body, nothing. And exactly 1 week later, May 27th, someone logged into Logan's Facebook account and checked in at the Olympia Regional Airport. Let that sink in. 7 days after a young man vanishes from a drifting car on I-5, his social media account pings from an airport 12 miles away. Was it Logan? Was it someone who had his phone, which, remember, was supposedly recovered from the car? Was it a scheduled automated check-in, a hacker, a taunt? investigators never confirmed the answer. So what happened to Logan Schindelman? There are really only two roads this case can go down, and neither one leads anywhere comfortable. The first theory is a mental health crisis. The epiphany, the paranoia, the heavy marijuana use, the aimless hours of highway driving. Put it all together and you get a picture of a young man in the grip of a severe psychotic break. Under this theory, Logan may have abandoned his own car at some point during that long, looping drive. The naked teenager in the woods? That could be him. There's a documented phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. People in the late stages of hypothermia or acute psychosis will strip off their clothes, convinced they're burning up when they're actually freezing to death. If Logan stumbled deep enough into the Washington timber in that state, the forest would have swallowed him whole. Those woods are dense, dark, and vast. Search dogs are good, but they're not magic. A body can lie 50 feet from a trail and never be found. But here's the problem with that theory. If Logan abandoned the car himself, who were the two white men standing with him on the shoulder that morning? And who was the white male with brown hair who jumped out of the passenger side that afternoon? A psychotic break doesn't explain other people driving your car. Which brings us to the second theory: foul play. Under this reading, Logan's erratic driving brought him into contact with the wrong people. Maybe he pulled over and someone approached him. Maybe he picked up hitchhikers in a moment of impaired judgment. Maybe the epiphany was connected to something dangerous, a debt, a threat, a confrontation he was trying to process. Whatever happened, the theory goes, these unidentified men took control of the situation, took control of the car, and took Logan somewhere he was never meant to come back from. The drifting Sebring wasn't a malfunction. It was a disposal, someone ditching a dead man's car on a busy highway, bailing out the passenger door, and disappearing into the trees before anyone could get a good look. But even this theory has its cracks. Why leave all his belongings? If you carjack someone, you take the cash, you take the phone. You don't leave $25 sitting in the console like a tip. And the Facebook check-in a week later, was that a digital ghost? A cruel joke? Or is there a version of this story where Logan is alive somewhere, stripped of everything, unable or unwilling to come home? Here's what I keep coming back to. Interstate 5 is not a lonely road. It's not a desert highway where you can disappear between mile markers and nobody notices for days. This is a commuter artery. Thousands of eyes, thousands of dash cams, state patrol cruisers rolling past every few minutes. And yet, somehow, in the middle of all of that noise and visibility and people, a 19-year-old kid vanished so completely that not even the dogs could find a trail. His car drifted across 3 lanes like a ship with no captain. His wallet sat untouched. His phone went quiet. And somewhere in the dark, wet timber lining that highway, something happened that nobody has been able to explain for almost a decade. Logan Schindelman told his grandmother he'd had an epiphany. He promised they'd talk about it that evening. Whatever he figured out, he took it with him. Bellevue, Washington. If you don't know it, let me paint you a picture. This isn't some forgotten rural outpost where things slip through the cracks. Bellevue is one of the wealthiest suburbs in America. It sits right across Lake Washington from Seattle, a manicured sprawl of tech money and luxury SUVs and homes with 3-car garages. The schools are excellent, the streets are clean, the crime rate is laughably low. It is, by almost every measurable standard, one of the safest places you could possibly raise a child in the United States. On the morning of November 6th, 2011, a 2-year-old boy vanished from this neighborhood. And the story his mother told police about how it happened, it fell apart before the first officer even finished writing his report. His name was Sky Metalwala. He was 2 years old, and to this day, not a single trace of him has ever been found. Let's set the scene. It's a Sunday morning, the early November in the Pacific Northwest, which means the air has that particular damp bite to it. Low 40s, overcast, the kind of gray that settles over everything like a wet wool blanket and doesn't lift until April. The streets of Bellevue are quiet, Sunday morning quiet, A few joggers, maybe a dog walker, the occasional car pulling out of a driveway headed to brunch or church. It's the kind of morning where nothing happens, where nothing is supposed to happen. Sky Metalwala was, by every account, a sweet, normal little boy. Dark hair, big eyes. 2 years old, which means he was still in that stage where the whole world is new and enormous and slightly terrifying, where you cling to your parents' leg and trust that they are the one fixed point in a universe you can't yet make sense of. But the universe Sky was born into was anything but fixed. His parents, Solomon Metalwala and Julia Biryukova, were locked in one of the ugliest custody battles you'll ever hear about. And I don't mean they argued about weekends ugly. I mean mutual restraining orders. I mean lawyers upon lawyers. I mean a marriage that had curdled into something genuinely toxic long before the divorce papers were filed. And at the center of it, the thing that makes your stomach drop when you read the case file, is Julia Biryukova's documented history. She suffered from severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. She had been involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility after expressing violent ideations about her own children. Let me say that again. She was hospitalized because she told people she had thoughts about hurting her kids. And just a couple of years earlier, both parents had been arrested for leaving baby Sky, then only 2 months old, alone in a freezing car in a Target parking lot for nearly an hour in 27-degree weather. This is the household Sky Metalwala lived in. This is the backdrop. Now. The week before Sky disappeared, something important happened. After months of brutal legal warfare, Solomon and Julia finally reached a custody agreement through mediation, shared custody, visitation schedules, the whole thing signed and notarized. It was supposed to be the beginning of stability. Julia avoided it almost immediately. She claimed she'd been psychologically coerced into signing. The fragile piece shattered before the ink was dry. Jather and the legal battle ratcheted right back up to full intensity. 3 days later, Sky was gone. Here's what Julia told police. On the morning of November 6th, she said Sky woke up feeling sick. Not emergency room sick, but unwell enough that she decided to drive him to the Overlake Medical Center, which was nearby. She loaded Sky and his 4-year-old sister, Maylee, into her silver Acura SUV and headed out. But according to Julia, the car ran out of gas. She just died on the side of a quiet residential street, somewhere between her house and the hospital. So she made a decision. She unbuckled Mail, took the 4-year-old by the hand, left 2-year-old Sky strapped in his car seat, alone in an unlocked vehicle on a cold November morning, and walked approximately 1 mile to a Chevron gas station to get help. Now, this is where the story starts to come apart. Not slowly, not subtly. It comes apart like wet paper. Julia arrives at the Chevron station. She's supposedly a mother whose car just broke down with a sick toddler inside. Every second counts, right? The kid is ill. He's alone. It's cold. You'd expect her to be frantic. You'd expect her to burst through the door, grab a gas can, slap down a credit card, and sprint back to the car. She didn't buy gas. She didn't grab a can. She didn't ask the station attendant for help. She pulled out her phone and called a friend to come pick her up. Not 911. Not the boy's father. Not the hospital she was supposedly driving to. A friend. By the time anyone actually went back to the silver Acura, Sky's car seat was empty. The doors were unlocked. The boy was gone. Let's talk about the car. When Bellevue police arrived on scene and examined the Acura, they did what any reasonable investigator would do first. They checked the fuel situation. They put the key in the ignition and turned it. The car started immediately. No hesitation, no sputter. The engine turned over clean. The fuel tank had plenty of gas. The battery was fine. The electrical system was fine. Everything was in perfect working order. The car never ran out of gas. That was a lie. A provable, mechanical, verifiable lie told to police by the last person known to have been with a missing 2-year-old child. So let's follow that thread. If the car didn't break down, why did Julia pull over? Why did she park on the side of that street? Why did she construct this entire elaborate narrative about walking to a gas station if the vehicle was functioning perfectly? There's only one reason you fabricate a story like that. You need to explain why you left the car. You need a reason for the gap, the window of time where you were away from the vehicle and conveniently away from the child. You need a story that accounts for Sky being there one moment and gone the next, and you need your hands to appear clean in the telling of it. But here's the thing. Even if we generously accept the broken down car story at face value, the behavior still makes no sense. Your 2-year-old is sick enough that you're driving him to a hospital at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Your car dies. You have a cell phone in your pocket. You're standing on a residential street in one of the most affluent suburbs in America, surrounded by houses full of people who would help you in a heartbeat. Why don't you call 911? A sick toddler, stranded in a dead vehicle on a cold morning. That's exactly the kind of call dispatchers respond to in minutes. Why don't you knock on the nearest door and ask to use a phone or ask someone to watch your children while you sort out the car? Why don't you call your ex-husband, the boy's father, who by all accounts desperately wanted to be in his children's lives? And here's the one that really gnaws at me. Why do you leave the sick child and take the healthy one? Think about that. If you absolutely must walk a mile in the cold to get help, which you don't because you have a phone, you take the sick child with you. You carry him. He's 2. He weighs maybe 25 pounds. You bundle him against your chest and you walk. Because leaving a sick toddler alone and unattended in an unlocked car on a public street is not something a concerned mother does. It's not something any mother does. Not unless the goal isn't rescue. Not unless the story is already written and the child is already a prop in a narrative designed to end exactly the way it ended. Now, let's talk about what happened after. When a child goes missing, especially a child this young, the parent's behavior tells investigators almost everything they need to know. In legitimate abduction cases, the parents are inconsolable. They hold press conferences. They plead on camera with tears running down their faces. They beg the public. They cooperate with police obsessively, answering the same questions 100 times because even the chance that one detail might bring their baby home is worth any amount of discomfort. Julia Biryukova did none of this. Within days of Sky's disappearance, she retained a lawyer and stopped cooperating with the Bellevue Police Department entirely. She refused to sit for follow-up interviews. She refused to take a polygraph. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't make a tearful appeal. She went silent. Completely, absolutely, stonewall silent. And she has remained silent for over 14 years. Meanwhile, investigators dug into her digital footprint and found something chilling. Her Facebook page was full of photographs of her daughter, Maylee, smiling, playing, birthday parties, the normal album of a proud mother documenting her child's life. But Sky? Not a single photograph, not one. It was as if he didn't exist in her digital world at all, as if he'd already been erased before he ever disappeared from that car seat. They also discovered she was active on a niche dating website specifically designed for women seeking wealthy benefactors, so-called sugar daddies, requesting between $3,000 and $5,000 a month in financial support. She was drowning. The family was facing foreclosure on multiple properties. The legal fees from the custody war were crushing. The financial pressure was immense, and Sky, a sick, demanding toddler at the center of a fight she was losing, represented an obligation she may not have been willing or able to carry any longer. And then there's the detail that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The night before Sky vanished, November 5th, 2011, a rerun of Law & Order, Special Victims Unit aired on local Seattle television. The episode was called Missing Pieces. The plot centered on a parent who fabricates an abduction to cover up a child's death. A parent who stages a scene, tells a story about the child being taken by a stranger, and walls up behind a lawyer when the questions get too pointed. Solomon Metalwala told investigators that SVU was Julia's favorite show. She watched it religiously. Now, I'm not saying she sat down with a notepad and mapped out a plan based on a television procedural. But the parallels are so specific, so structurally identical to what she described the next morning that investigators couldn't ignore it. A child left in a vehicle, a fabricated reason for the parents' absence, a stranger abduction narrative deployed as a shield. It was the same story, beat for beat. The Bellevue Police Department named Julia Biryukova a person of interest almost immediately, but they made a calculated decision that haunts this case to this day. They chose not to charge her with child endangerment for leaving Sky in the car, not because they believed her story, they clearly didn't, but because filing that charge would legally require the prosecution to accept the premise that Sky was actually in the car that morning, and the investigators weren't convinced he was. Think about what that means. The police, the people who examined every piece of evidence, who walked the street and tested the car and interviewed the witnesses, they don't believe Sky Metalwala was ever in that silver Acura on November 6th. They believe whatever happened to that little boy happened before Julia ever turned the key in the ignition. The drive, the breakdown, the walk to the gas station, all of it, in their estimation, was theater. A carefully constructed stage play performed for an audience of one, the police report. Massive searches were conducted. Officers canvassed every house on that street. They searched yards, dumpsters, drainage systems, wooded lots. Dive teams checked nearby bodies of water. The case made national news. Sky's face was everywhere, on posters, on websites, on the evening broadcast. Nothing. No trace, no clothing, no remains, no sighting, no credible lead. Just a quiet suburban street in one of the safest cities in America, a silver Acura with a full tank of gas and an empty car seat. And somewhere, Julia Biryukova knows exactly what happened that morning. She knows where her son is. She's known for 14 years, and she has chosen every single day for over 5,000 days to say absolutely nothing. Sky Metalwala would be 16 years old now, old enough to drive, old enough to ask questions, old enough to wonder why nobody came looking hard enough. But people did look. People are still looking. The only person who could end this, the only person who holds the answer, simply refuses to speak. And the car? The car worked fine. It always worked fine. There's a particular kind of road in the Pacific Northwest that doesn't feel like it belongs to the modern world. You turn off the main highway, and within minutes the asphalt narrows, the pavement gives way to gravel, and the trees close in overhead like a tunnel. The light changes, the air changes, your cell phone drops to 0 bars and stays there. You're not driving through a forest anymore, you're driving into one. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a very old, very quiet part of your brain starts whispering that you've gone far enough. Canyon Creek Road, branching off the Mount Baker Highway in Washington's North Cascades, is exactly that kind of road. It's an unpaved logging track that winds deep into the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, a vast vertical wilderness of ancient timber, sheer ravines, and granite walls draped in moss. Search and rescue teams know this terrain well. They know how quickly it swallows people. They know that a car can tumble off one of these embankments and come to rest at the bottom of a slope so steep, so choked with undergrowth, that you could drive past it 100 times and never see it from the road above. In March of 2000, a jogger noticed something wrong along this road. Broken branches, torn bark on the trees lining a steep drop-off, fresh damage, violent damage, the kind that says something heavy came through here fast and didn't stop. There at the bottom of that ravine sat a white 1993 Jeep Cherokee. It was destroyed, crumpled, rolled, every window shattered, the frame bent into shapes that metal isn't supposed to take. It looked like a fatal accident, the kind where you brace yourself before looking inside because you know what you're going to find. But when rescuers climbed down that slope and forced open the doors, the driver's seat was empty. The back seat was empty. Nobody was thrown from the vehicle. Nobody was pinned underneath it. The Jeep belonged to a 23-year-old woman from North Carolina named Leah Roberts. And she was gone. Completely, inexplicably gone. That was 26 years ago. She has never been found. To understand how Leah Roberts ended up on a remote logging road 3,000 miles from home, you need to understand what she was running from, or more accurately, what she was trying to outrun. Leah was a bright, curious young woman, an anthropology and Spanish major at North Carolina State University. The kind of person who read voraciously, who thought deeply about the world, who wanted to understand how people lived in places she'd never been. By every account, she was sharp, warm, and quietly ambitious. And then, in the space of about 2 years, her entire world collapsed. Both of her parents died, not slowly, not with warning. The kind of sudden, devastating losses that rearrange the architecture of a person's life overnight. And as if grief weren't enough, Leah survived a horrific car accident in the fall of 1998 that punctured her lung and shattered her right femur so badly that surgeons had to bolt a titanium rod alongside the bone to hold it together. She spent months recovering. The physical pain was immense. The emotional pain was worse. By the time she was supposed to graduate, Leah couldn't do it. She dropped out, was just weeks before finishing her degree. She was adrift, parentless, physically scarred, psychologically untethered, and somewhere in that fog of grief, she found a lifeline in a book. Jack Kerouac's The Dharma Bums. If you've read it, you know the ethos. Abandon the conventional, hit the road, seek meaning in motion. For Leah, it wasn't just literature. It was a prescription. She became convinced that a cross-country road trip, spontaneous, unplanned, or raw, could do what staying in Durham could not. It could shake something loose. It could help her feel alive again. So in early March of 2000, Leah withdrew several $1,000s from her bank account, loaded her cat into a carrier, climbed into her white Jeep Cherokee, and pointed west. She left a note for her roommate, vague, Kerouac-flavored, something about finding herself, and a stack of rent money on the kitchen counter. She told her sister Kara that she wasn't sure what came next. And then she drove, hard, fast, thousands of miles in just a few days, barreling across the country on Interstate 40 through the desert Southwest, up through California, and north along I-5 into Washington State. The last confirmed footage of Leah alive comes from a gas station security camera in Brooks, Oregon, just after midnight on March 13th. She's alone. She looks tired, but functional. She fills the tank and keeps driving north. Later that day, she arrives in Bellingham, Washington, a college town near the Canadian border, the last outpost before the wilderness truly begins. A recovered movie ticket stub tells us she went to a matinee showing of American Beauty. And then eyewitnesses place her at a restaurant inside the Belly's Fair Mall, where she was seen having a conversation with 2 unidentified men. She apparently mentioned her Kerouac-inspired journey. She referred to one of the men as Barry. Nobody knows who Barry was. Nobody knows who the second man was. Neither has ever been identified. Neither has ever come forward. And then, silence. 5 days of absolute nothing. Until the morning of March 18th, when those joggers spotted the broken trees on Canyon Creek Road. Now, let's talk about the crash. When investigators reached the bottom of that ravine and began processing the Jeep, they expected to find the aftermath of a terrible accident. A young woman, unfamiliar with mountain roads, takes a turn too fast on loose gravel and goes over. Tragic, but straightforward. Except nothing about the scene was straightforward. The crash reconstruction team estimated the Jeep went over the embankment at roughly 40 miles per hour. Unbraked. No skid marks on the road above. No evidence that anyone had tried to stop. The vehicle rolled multiple times on the way down, a violent, catastrophic descent that would have ragdolled anyone inside the cabin. But here's the thing. There was no blood, not a drop. Not on the steering wheel, not on the dashboard, not on the shattered glass, not on the deployed airbag. The seatbelts showed 0 stress stretching, the kind of distortion you'd see if a human body had been thrown against them during a rollover. The physical evidence didn't just suggest that Leah wasn't injured in the crash. It screamed that nobody was inside the vehicle when it went off that cliff. An empty car launched into a ravine at 40 miles per hour. Was he with no driver? How does that happen? It took 6 years to find out. In 2006, cold case detectives ordered a full mechanical re-examination of the Jeep's engine, and buried under the hood, they found the answer, or at least a deeply unsettling piece of it. A critical wire connected to the vehicle's starter motor and acceleration system had been deliberately cut, not frayed, not corroded. Cut. Intentionally severed in a way that would allow the engine to rev and the car to accelerate on its own without a human foot on the gas pedal. Someone had rigged that Jeep to drive itself off a cliff. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a suicide. This was a staged crime scene. Somebody with mechanical knowledge, somebody who understood how a car's ignition and throttle system worked, had turned Leah's Jeep into a self-destroying piece of evidence, aimed it at the edge, and let gravity do the rest. The crash was supposed to be the explanation, a sad story about a troubled young woman who lost control on a mountain road. Case closed, move on, nothing to see. But the physics didn't cooperate. The missing blood, the unstressed seatbelts, the absent body, it all pointed to the same conclusion. The Jeep was a decoy. A massive, loud, spectacular distraction designed to make everyone look at the wreck instead of looking for Leah. And then there are the belongings. Scattered in the woods around the crash site, investigators found Leah's passport, her driver's license, her checkbook, and her acoustic guitar. Items you'd need if you were starting a new life. Items that would be the first things you'd grab if you were disappearing on purpose, but tucked carefully under a floor mat inside the destroyed Jeep. Not scattered, not thrown, but placed, was $2,500 in cash, and her late mother's diamond engagement ring. The single, most sentimental, irreplaceable object Leah owned on this earth. Now let's apply logic. If Leah staged her own disappearance, if she rigged the car, faked her death, and walked off into the wilderness to start over as someone new, why would she leave the money? You can't build a new life without cash. And why, in the name of everything that matters, would she leave her dead mother's ring behind? A woman who carried that ring across 3,000 miles of highway, who kept it close through every mile of a grief-fueled journey, does not tuck it under a floor mat and walk away. That ring was her mother. You don't abandon that. Not if you have a choice, which means she didn't have a choice, which means someone else made that decision for her. But here's the detail that makes this case truly impossible to put down. After the crash, somebody used the wrecked Jeep as a shelter. Investigators found blankets and pillows draped over the shattered windows, rigged up like curtains, crude but deliberate, the work of someone trying to block the wind and create a dark, concealed space inside the crumpled cabin. Someone climbed down that ravine after the crash and bedded down in the wreckage. Was it Leah? Injured, disoriented, crawling back to the only shelter she could find before succumbing to the elements or her wounds? Or was it someone else entirely, the person who staged the crash, using the wreck as a temporary hideout while they waited for the heat to die down before slipping back onto the logging road and vanishing into the network of forest tracks? Both possibilities are terrifying. Neither has been proven. And then, 14 years later, the case took one more sickening turn. In 2014, a mummified body was discovered in the broader wilderness of the North Cascades region. The remains had a surgical metal rod implanted in the right femur. Investigators traced the serial number on the rod back to the manufacturer, and the shipping records showed it came from the exact same production batch that was sent to hospitals in the fall of 1998, the precise window when Leah Roberts underwent her femur reconstruction surgery. The odds of that being a coincidence are astronomically small, but the medical examiner classified the remains as male. Male. The true crime community erupted. Was it a misidentification? Skeletal sex determination, while generally reliable, is not infallible, particularly with mummified or heavily degraded remains. Could the examiner have gotten it wrong? Could this body, found in the same vast wilderness where Leah's staged crash occurred, carrying a titanium rod from the same surgical batch shipped during the same narrow time frame, could this actually be Leah? As of today, the official classification has never been corrected. The remains are still listed as male. The question hangs in the air like smoke that won't clear. Leah Roberts was 23 years old. She had buried both her parents. She had survived a car wreck that nearly killed her. She had read a book that told her the road could heal what grief could not, and she believed it hard enough to pack everything she owned into a Jeep and drive 3,000 miles into the unknown. She made it all the way to the edge of the continent. She sat in a dark theater and watched a movie about the beauty hiding inside ordinary life. She talked to strangers in a mall restaurant about freedom and the open road, and then she drove up a mountain into the kind of forest that doesn't give back what it takes. Somewhere on that road, she met the wrong person. Someone with tools and knowledge and intent. Someone who cut a wire, aimed a Jeep at a cliff, and let the wilderness write the cover story. The forest kept its secret. It's kept it for 26 years. And under a floor mat in a mangled Jeep at the bottom of a ravine, a dead mother's diamond ring waited for a daughter who never came back to claim it. Tenino, Washington. Population, roughly 1,800. If you've never been there, imagine the smallest town you can think of, then shrink it a little more. It's one of those places south of Olympia where the suburbs dissolve into farmland and timber, where the main street has a hardware store and a diner and maybe a gas station, and where the rhythm of life moves at the speed of seasons, not news cycles. People here know each other, not in the vague wave from the driveway way you get in the suburbs. They know each other. They know whose truck is parked where. They know who's dating who. They know when something is off. It's the kind of town where you don't always lock your front door at night. Because why would you? Nothing happens in Tenino. Until the evening of March 6th, 2009, when a 36-year-old mother of two stepped out of her house and never came back. And the thing that makes this case impossible to let go of isn't the disappearance itself. It's what happened 10 years later, when someone picked up a phone, dialed 911, and told the dispatcher exactly what he did to her, and then took it all back. Nancy Moyer was, by every measure, the kind of person a small town is built around. She was 36. She worked a steady, respectable job as an analyst at the Washington State Department of Ecology. She was raising 2 young daughters, and she was navigating a separation from her husband with a maturity that most divorcing couples never manage. The split was genuinely amicable, the custody arrangement was functional, and both parents were focused on making things work for the girls. Nancy wasn't miserable. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't in crisis. In fact, friends described her as cautiously optimistic. She was testing the waters of single life for the first time in years, going out more, meeting people, and entering what those close to her called a dating phase. She was a woman rebuilding, not unraveling, and that matters. It matters because when someone vanishes, the first thing investigators look for is a reason to leave. Financial ruin, abusive relationships, mental illness, criminal entanglements. Nancy had none of it. Her life was stable, her children were her anchor, and the idea that she would simply walk away from them without a word, without a plan, without her wallet or her car or a single possession, is not just unlikely. It is, according to everyone who knew her, unthinkable. Friday, March 6th, 2009. A damp, cold evening in Tenino. The kind of early March night where the temperature sits stubbornly around 40 degrees and a light rain comes and goes without ever really committing. Fog patches cling to the low ground. It gets dark early, and once it does, the town folds in on itself. Porch lights come on, curtains close, and the streets go quiet. Nancy gets a ride home from a coworker after her shift. She stops to pick up a few things: groceries, a bottle of wine, normal Friday evening stuff. She gets dropped at her house, walks inside, and settles in. Her kids are with their father for the weekend. She has the place to herself. It's the kind of night where you pour a glass of wine, turn on the TV, and exhale. That's exactly what she did. And that's the last thing she ever did. 2 days later, Sunday evening, Nancy's estranged husband pulls up to her house to drop off their daughters after his custody weekend. He walks up to the front door and immediately knows something is wrong. The door is standing wide open, not ajar, open. Open to the elements, open to the cold, open to the dark. Inside, the living room lights are on, a bedroom lamp is on. The television is still running, filling the empty house with the tinny sound of whatever had been playing 2 days ago. And on the counter sits a glass of wine, poured but barely touched. Nancy's purse is inside the house. Her car keys are inside the house. Her identification is inside the house. Her vehicle is parked in the driveway. Nancy is not inside the house. Nancy is not anywhere. Now let's slow down and look at this scene, because the scene is the story. A woman who is running away takes things with her. She grabs her purse, she takes her car, she packs a bag, she makes a plan, even a bad one. A woman who is running away does not leave the front door wide open and a glass of wine on the counter. That's not departure. That's interruption. Everything about that house says the same thing. Nancy was in the middle of her evening. She was home. She was comfortable. And something, or someone, pulled her out of that comfort so quickly, so abruptly, that she didn't even have time to set the glass down properly or close the door behind her. Think about when you step outside your own house for 30 seconds. Maybe someone knocks. Maybe you hear a noise in the driveway. Maybe a neighbor calls your name from the yard. You don't grab your coat. You don't grab your keys. You don't close the door all the way because you're not going anywhere. You're just stepping out for a moment. Nancy stepped out for a moment, and the moment never ended. For 10 years, that's where the case sat. Open door, cold wine, missing woman. Thurston County detectives investigated, canvassed, interviewed. They talked to friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriends, neighbors. They chased leads that went nowhere and tips that evaporated. Nancy Moyer became one of those names that locals knew but the rest of the world forgot. A cold case pinned to a corkboard in a county sheriff's office, waiting. And then, on July 9, 2019, a man picked up a phone and blew the case wide open. His name was Eric Lee Roberts. He was Nancy's next-door neighbor, but he also happened to be a former co-worker at the Department of Ecology. He lived mere feet from her front door on the night she vanished. Roberts called 911 on a recorded line. He gave his full legal name, and then he told the dispatcher in detail that he had murdered Nancy Moyer. He said he was tired of holding it inside, tired of the wait. When detectives arrived and sat him down for a formal interview, he didn't back off. He spoke for 34 minutes on tape. He provided specific mechanical details of how Nancy died. He said they had been involved in an intimate relationship, something he'd explicitly denied in his original 2009 interview when he told police Nancy had never once been inside his home. He said he killed her by strangling her with a scarf during a rough sexual encounter at his house. He said it was an accident, that things went too far, that he panicked. And he told them he burned the scarf in his fire pit because it disgusted him, but that he'd kept her other clothing hidden in his basement. And then he did something that still makes investigators' skin crawl. He walked a lead detective out to his backyard, stood next to a large concrete pad he'd built shortly after Nancy's disappearance, and said, "On the record, if I was going to get rid of a body on my property, it would be right there. Let's stop. Let's look at what we're dealing with. This is not a vague, confused, half-remembered admission muttered by a drunk man at a bar. This is a man who called emergency services, identified himself by name, provided a detailed narrative of a specific killing, described the method of death, told police where the murder weapon was destroyed, admitted to hiding the victim's belongings, and then physically walked an officer to a concrete slab on his property and essentially said, 'She's under there.' And then, less than 24 hours later, he took it all back. Roberts recanted everything. He said he'd been drinking. He said he was on medication. He said the confession was a false memory generated by the combination of alcohol and pills. He said he was just tired of police bothering him over the years and figured if he confessed, they'd finally leave him alone. Let's apply logic to that for a second. You're a man who's been periodically questioned by police about a missing woman for 10 years. You find this annoying. Your solution to making the police stop asking you questions is to confess to her murder on a recorded 911 call? In what universe does that make the police go away? In what reality does calling 911 and saying, "I killed someone," result in less police attention? That's like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it. The recantation doesn't just fail to explain the confession, it actively contradicts its own stated logic. But here's where it gets worse, or because Roberts' words weren't floating in a vacuum. They landed on a bed of circumstantial evidence that had been accumulating for a decade. Shortly after Nancy vanished in the spring of 2009, Roberts undertook a sudden, aggressive home renovation project. He poured a massive concrete pad in his backyard. He built an oversized industrial-grade fire pit right next to it. When people asked about it, he said it was the foundation for a man cave, but no plumbing was ever run to the pad. No electrical lines were ever connected. It was a concrete slab and a fire pit, and nothing else was ever built on top of it. And here's the detail that seals it for a lot of people who followed this case. Before Nancy disappeared, Eric Roberts was known for throwing big, loud, raucous outdoor parties on his property. Bonfires, barbecues, camping in the yard with friends. It was his thing. His neighbors expected it. The moment that concrete was poured, the party stopped. Permanently. No more gatherings, no more bonfires, no more camping. He never hosted another event on that property again. A man who loved having people trampling around his backyard suddenly didn't want anyone near it. And then there's the behavioral history that Roberts' ex-girlfriends shared with investigators. Multiple former partners reported that he became violent and unpredictable when he drank. And the specific behavior they described, the pattern that showed up again and again, was choking. Choking women during sexual encounters, the exact mechanism of death he described in his 34-minute recorded confession. He didn't confess to shooting her. He didn't confess to stabbing her. He confessed to strangling her with a scarf during rough sex, and his ex-girlfriends, independently and without knowledge of the confession's details, told police he had a documented history of doing exactly that. So why isn't Eric Roberts in prison? Because they never found Nancy's body. The prosecutor's office reviewed the confession, reviewed the circumstantial evidence, reviewed the behavioral history, and ultimately declined to file murder charges. The legal reasoning was straightforward, if agonizing. Without a body, proving corpus delicti, the physical fact that a crime occurred, becomes enormously difficult, and the immediate recantation gave any future defense attorney a weapon. My client was intoxicated. He told you himself it was a false memory. You can't convict a man based on words he took back before the sun came up. Roberts was arrested on unrelated firearms charges found during the property search. He was held. But for the murder of Nancy Moyer, he was never formally charged. They searched the property. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. They dug. And they couldn't find what they needed to find. The concrete held its secret. Here's what keeps people up at night about this case. Nancy Moyer's daughters grew up in Tenino. They went to school in Tenino. They walked those streets, passed those houses, lived in the shadow of the place where their mother was last alive. And the man who called 911 and told the world he killed their mother. The man who described the killing in intimate mechanical detail, who pointed to a concrete slab in his yard and all but drew a map. That man lived next door. In a town of 1,800 people, that's not an abstraction. That's not a name in a case file. That's the guy you see at the grocery store. That's the truck parked 2 driveways over. That's the face in the window when you pull into your own driveway at night. The Hide and Seek podcast spent an entire season digging into Roberts' background. And many investigators believe it was the mounting public pressure from that coverage that finally cracked something in him, that made him pick up the phone on that July night and unburden himself for 34 minutes before the walls went back up. But 34 minutes wasn't enough. Not without a body, not without physical proof, not without the one piece of evidence that would turn a recorded confession into a conviction. Nancy Moyer has been missing for 16 years. She left behind 2 daughters, an untouched glass of wine, and an open door. And somewhere in Tenino, Washington, a town so small that everyone knows everyone's business, someone kept the biggest secret in that community's history for a decade before whispering it into a 911 line and then swallowing it back down. The door is still open, the wine is still cold, and the concrete is still there. Tacoma, Washington, August 1961. If you could freeze a single frame of American life at its most innocent, its most trusting, its most dangerously naive, this would be it. Eisenhower has just left office. Kennedy is in the White House. The suburbs are brand new and gleaming, built on the promise that the cul-de-sac is the safest place on Earth. Kids ride their bikes until the streetlights come on. Dads mow their lawns on Saturday. Moms leave the kitchen window cracked for the cross breeze. And nobody locks the front door. The North End neighborhood of Tacoma was exactly this kind of place. Tree-lined streets, modest, well-kept homes, a grocery store owner, a teacher, a mechanic, that's who lived here. Working families whose biggest concern was whether it would rain on the church picnic. The idea that something could come into your house at night, reach into your child's bedroom, and take her. That concept didn't exist here. It wasn't a fear. It wasn't even a possibility. It simply didn't belong in this world. And then, on the morning of August 31st, 1961, an 8-year-old girl named Ann Marie Burr was gone from her bed. No note, no sound, no struggle. Just an empty room and an open door, and a family's life shattered into a mystery that has lasted over 60 years. But here's what makes this case different from every other missing child investigation of its era. Because a few blocks away, in that same quiet neighborhood, on that same quiet night, there lived a 14-year-old boy. A boy who delivered newspapers on a route that passed directly by the Burr family's house. A boy who neighbors would later describe as mean-spirited, who dug hidden traps in the woods designed to hurt other children, who wandered the streets at odd hours doing things no one wanted to think too carefully about. His name was Ted Bundy. Let's set the scene properly because the atmosphere matters. The night of August 30th, or stretching into the early morning of August 31st, was unusual for Tacoma. Late August in the Pacific Northwest is typically mild and dry, the last gasp of summer before the gray sets in for 8 months. But this night was different. It was warm, uncomfortably warm, muggy, stagnant air that sat on the neighborhood like a blanket. The overnight low hovered around 59 degrees, which doesn't sound extreme, but in a region where most homes in 1961 didn't have air conditioning, and it was enough to make sleeping miserable. So families did what families did. They cracked the windows. They left the screen doors unlatched. They invited the night air in because the alternative was lying in a sweatbox staring at the ceiling. It was standard practice. It was what everyone did. And it meant that on this particular night, the Burr household, like every other house on the block, was essentially open. Ann Marie Burr was 8 years old, the daughter of Don Burr, who owned a local grocery store, and Beverly Burr, a devoted mother managing a busy household. Ann Marie was, by all descriptions, a completely ordinary, well-adjusted kid. No behavioral problems, no enemies, no reason for anyone to target her. She wore a blue nightgown to bed that night, along with a thin chain holding 2 small Catholic medals, a Madonna and Child, and a St. Christopher. Small, personal, sacred things that an 8-year-old girl wouldn't take off before climbing under the covers. She shared an upstairs bedroom with her 3-year-old sister Mary, who was dealing with her own small crisis, a broken arm set in a heavy plaster cast. The cast was uncomfortable. It itched. It made sleeping difficult. And sometime in the middle of the night, Mary started crying. Ann Marie did what a good big sister does. She got out of bed, took Mary down the hall to their parents' room, and woke her mother. Beverly comforted the toddler, soothed the pain, and sent both girls back to their shared room. That's the last time anyone in the Burr family saw Ann Marie alive. 5:30 in the morning. Beverly wakes up and goes to check on Mary's arm. She opens the bedroom door and finds the 3-year-old alone in the room, crying softly. Ann Marie's bed is empty. The sheets are pushed back. The girl is gone. Beverly checks the bathroom. She checks the other bedrooms. She checks the kitchen. Nothing. Then she goes downstairs and sees it. The front door is open, not kicked in, not forced. The lock has been turned from the inside, and the door is standing slightly ajar, letting the early morning air drift through the house. In the living room, a small window, one of those narrow chest-height windows that runs along the side of the house, has been pushed open. And outside, directly beneath that window, A wooden garden bench that normally sits in the yard has been moved and placed upright against the exterior wall, positioned like a step. Someone used the bench to reach the window. Someone opened that window from the outside, and someone left through the front door. By 6:45 a.m., Tacoma police were on scene. By the afternoon, the search had escalated to a scale the neighborhood had never seen. 100 soldiers from Fort Lewis and 50 National Guardsmen sweeping the surrounding blocks. The parks, the wooded ravines, every crawl space and basement and shed within a mile radius. They found nothing. Ann Marie Burr had been extracted from a house containing 2 adults, 3 other children, and a family dog in the dead of night without producing a single scream, a single thump, a single bark. Now, let's talk about that crime scene, because the physical evidence is where this case starts folding in on itself. The bench under the window tells a clear story. Someone climbed up and came in from outside. Fine. But here's the problem. Directly inside that window, sitting on a small table flush against the sill, was a collection of delicate glass figurines. Tiny, fragile, decorative pieces arranged carefully on the surface. If you climb through a narrow window in the dark, especially a window you've never been through before, you're going to bump that table. You're going to knock something over. You're going to send a glass figurine clattering to the hardwood floor in a silent house at 3 in the morning. Not a single figurine was disturbed. Not one was out of place. Not one was broken. How? How does a full-grown adult, or even a lanky teenager, squeeze through a narrow window, clear a table of fragile glass objects, land silently on a hardwood floor, navigate an unfamiliar house in total darkness, climb the stairs without making them creak, is enter a bedroom containing 2 sleeping children, extract one of them without waking the other, carry her back down the stairs, unlock the front door from the inside, and walk out into the night, all without making a single sound, loud enough to wake the parents sleeping one room over or the family Cocker Spaniel. Actually, about that dog. The dog did bark. The family heard it during the night, barking aggressively outside, which suggests something triggered it. An unfamiliar presence on the property, a scent that didn't belong. But it barked outside, not inside, which means whoever was in the yard hadn't entered the house yet, or had already left. And then there's the cast. Ann Marie had a broken arm and a plaster cast. If someone grabbed her in the dark, if she was startled awake by a stranger's hand, the natural reaction is to flail, to pull away, to cry out. A child with a broken arm being jostled or restrained would be in pain. Sharp, what's immediate, involuntary, scream-level pain. Yet no one in the house heard a thing. Either Ann Marie went willingly with whoever took her, meaning she recognized them, trusted them enough to walk quietly out into the night, or she was incapacitated so quickly and so completely that she never had a chance to make a sound. Neither of those possibilities is comforting, but they both point in the same direction. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, knew the layout of the house or the habits of the family, and moved with a precision that borders on practiced. Now, let's talk about the boy down the street. In 1961, Ted Bundy was 14 years old. He lived with his family just a few blocks from the Burr residence, close enough that the 2 households existed within the same small orbit of neighborhood life. Bundy was a morning paper boy, and his delivery route ran directly past or near the Burr home. He walked those sidewalks in the dark hours before dawn, day after day, learning the rhythms of the street. Which houses had lights on early, which dogs were outside, which windows were left open. He also regularly visited a great-uncle who worked at the University of Puget Sound, located just down the road from the Burr place. He knew this neighborhood intimately. It was his turf. Now, here's what the neighbors would later tell biographers and investigators about the teenage Ted Bundy, and once they had the terrible benefit of hindsight. He was a mean-spirited kid, not the charming all-American facade he would later perfect as an adult predator. At 14, the mask was thinner. Neighbors recalled that he dug concealed pits in the neighborhood woods, sharpened stick traps like punji stakes, specifically designed to injure children who played in those areas. This wasn't mischief. This was predatory engineering by a teenager who was already testing how much pain he could inflict without getting caught. And then there's the footprint. Police found a shoe impression in the dirt near the overturned bench outside the window. They identified it as a size 6 or 7 Keds sneaker. That's a remarkably small shoe for an adult male. Most grown men wear a 10, 11, 12, but for a 14-year-old boy in 1961, a size 6 fits perfectly. And Ted Bundy's shoe size at that age was, in fact, a size 6. And one more thing. On the morning of August 31st, while the neighborhood erupted into a desperate search, Ann Marie's father, Don Burr, was going door to door, checking yards, calling her name. And he later told investigators with absolute certainty that he saw a teenage boy standing silently in a ditch on the University of Puget Sound campus nearby. Not searching, not helping, just watching. Standing in the shadows, observing the chaos with what Don Burr described as eerie stillness. He identified that boy as Ted Bundy. But here's where the case hits its wall, and it's a wall that is held for 6 decades. Ted Bundy denied it. He denied it his entire life. Even in the final hours before his execution in 1989, when he was confessing to murders across multiple states, cataloging his victims with the detached precision of a man filing paperwork, he maintained that he had nothing to do with Ann Marie Burr. That he even wrote a letter to Beverly Burr, the girl's mother, explicitly denying involvement. But the profilers who studied Bundy point out something important about that denial. Bundy was a man who wielded confession as a form of control. He decided what to reveal and what to keep. He gave investigators just enough to maintain their attention, to keep himself relevant, to extend his leverage on death row. And that the crimes he withheld were the ones that cost him something personally, the ones too close to home, as he reportedly told investigator Robert Keppel. The ones involving very young victims. The ones that didn't fit the public persona of the suave, articulate monster he had carefully constructed. An 8-year-old girl taken from her bed in his own neighborhood when he was 14 years old and not yet the sophisticated predator the world would come to know. That's exactly the kind of crime Bundy would take to the grave, not because he felt guilty, but because it was his and he didn't want to share it. In 2011, investigators attempted to settle the question with science. They tested degraded DNA samples collected from the original crime scene. The results were inconclusive. The samples were too old, too fragile, too compromised by 60 years of storage technology that didn't exist when the evidence was collected. The DNA couldn't confirm Bundy, but it couldn't exclude him either, and that's where it sits. That's where it's always sat. Skeptics of the Bundy theory make a fair point. A 14-year-old boy, even a disturbed one, even one who dug traps to hurt other children, pulling off a flawless, silent home invasion, carrying a struggling 8-year-old out of a house with 2 adults, 3 siblings, and a dog, leaving behind a single footprint and nothing else. That requires a level of physical control and operational calm that most grown criminals never achieve. But the people who study Ted Bundy's psychology say something else. They say the monster doesn't arrive fully formed. He evolves, he practices. And every serial predator has a first time, a clumsy, terrifying, barely controlled first act that teaches them what works and what doesn't. Maybe August 31st, 1961 was that night. Maybe a 14-year-old boy who already knew how to build traps, who already wandered the neighborhood in the dark, who already knew which windows were open and which families were sleeping. Maybe he stood on a garden bench, pushed open a window, stepped over a row of glass figurines without touching a single one, and climbed the stairs to a room where 2 little girls were sleeping. And maybe he carried one of them out the front door into a warm, muggy Pacific Northwest night, and neither she nor the truth were ever seen again. Ann Marie Burr would be 72 years old today. She has never been found. The case remains open. And somewhere between a garden bench and a size 6 footprint, the answer to one of America's oldest missing child cases may also be the origin story of its most infamous killer. But the proof, the kind that closes files and locks cells, has never come. And after 64 years, it probably never will. All that's left is an empty bed, an open door, and a neighborhood that stopped leaving its windows cracked on warm summer nights. McCleary, Washington. Let me tell you about this town, because if you don't understand the place, you can't understand how impossible this story is. McCleary is a logging town, or it was anyway. By 2009, it was more of a former logging town, one of those tiny Pacific Northwest communities that time sort of forgot, population 1,600 give or take. One main road, a couple of churches, a general store. The kind of place where the big annual event is the Bear Festival, where everyone shows up because there's nowhere else to go. It's surrounded on all sides by thick, dark, ancient timber, towering Douglas firs that press in against the town limits like walls. But inside those walls, inside McCleary, the feeling was something else entirely. It was safe, aggressively, defiantly safe. This was a town where kids rode their bikes to each other's houses without telling their parents which route they took, where front doors were unlocked as a matter of principle, where everybody knew everybody, and a stranger's car on the wrong street would get noticed, remarked upon, and remembered. Lindsay Baum's mother, Melissa, had moved her family here from Tennessee specifically because McCleary felt like a place where nothing bad could ever reach her children. On the evening of June 26, 2009, that illusion shattered so completely that it has never been rebuilt. Let me set the scene. Late June in the Pacific Northwest is magic. The sun doesn't set until almost 10 o'clock. At 9 p.m., you've still got this long amber twilight stretching across the sky, and the air has that perfect warmth, upper 60s, maybe low 70s, where you don't need a jacket but the heat isn't oppressive. It's the kind of evening that exists specifically so kids can stay outside as long as possible. Screen doors slamming, sprinklers hissing, somebody's dad grilling on the back porch. You can hear laughter carrying down the block because the windows are all open and there's no traffic noise to compete with. Lindsay Baum was 10 years old, a sweet, normal, small-town kid. She loved reading. She loved animals. She'd recently moved to McCleary with her mom and her brother Joshua, and she was doing what 10-year-olds do in a town like this during summer break. She was at her friend's house, a few streets over from home, hanging out, burning daylight, she enjoying the freedom that comes with being a kid in a place where nobody worries. At some point that evening, Lindsay and her friend got into a minor argument, the kind of low-stakes disagreement that 10-year-olds have and forget about by the next morning. Lindsay decided she was done for the night. She was going to walk home. The distance from her friend's front door to her own was 4 blocks, in a town of 1,600 people, in broad twilight, on a warm summer evening when half the neighborhood was still outside. She never made it. Lindsay's mother, Melissa, realized something was wrong quickly. The walk should have taken less than 10 minutes. When Lindsay didn't come through the door, Melissa called the friend's house. Lindsay left a while ago, they said. She should be there by now. She wasn't. Melissa started making calls. Then she started driving the route. Then she started knocking on doors. By 10 o'clock, less than an hour after Lindsay left her friend's house, Melissa had called the police, and within hours, McCleary was swarming with more law enforcement than this town had ever seen in its entire history. The Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office, the Washington State Patrol, the FBI search helicopters beating the air above the tree line, tracking dogs working the streets and the timber perimeter, hundreds of volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder through the woods, calling her name until their voices gave out. Nothing, not a hair ribbon, not a shoe, not a shred of torn clothing snagged on a fence. The search consumed that town for days, then weeks, and it produced absolutely zero physical evidence that Lindsay Baum had existed past the moment she stepped off her friend's porch. She was just gone. Now let's talk about those 4 blocks, because the geography is the lock on this case, and nobody has ever found the key. 4 blocks in McCleary is not 4 blocks in Manhattan. There are no crowds to disappear into. There are no dark alleys or underground parking garages or subway entrances. It's residential streets, single-story houses, chain-link fences, flat front yards with clear sight lines. On a June evening at 9:15, people are outside. They're sitting on porches, they're watering gardens, they're walking dogs. They're looking up when a car drives by because a car driving by is something that happens infrequently enough to be noticed. If someone grabbed a 10-year-old girl off one of these streets, there would be evidence of it. A scream, a shout, the sound of a car door slamming in a hurry, tires squealing on pavement, something. Even a child who is grabbed from behind and restrained will kick, will thrash, will knock something over. Beat will make noise that carries on a quiet evening when every window in the neighborhood is open. Nobody heard anything. Nobody saw anything. Nobody reported a strange car idling on a side street or an unfamiliar person walking the route or any disturbance of any kind on any of those 4 blocks between 9:15 and 10 o'clock on the night of June 26, 2009. A 10-year-old girl walked into a 4-block stretch of small-town America on a summer evening and simply ceased to exist. In full twilight, surrounded by neighbors. How? The tracking dogs provided the only clue, and it's a clue that creates more questions than answers. When K9 units were brought in and given Lindsay's scent, the dogs followed a trail from her friend's house down the route she would have walked. They tracked it for a few blocks, and then the scent stopped. Not at a house, not at a wooded area, not at a fence or a field. It stopped in the middle of the street, on the asphalt, clean and abrupt, as if Lindsay had been standing on the pavement one moment and was physically lifted off the earth the next. In tracking dog methodology, a scent trail that terminates on a road surface almost always means one thing. The subject entered a vehicle. The scent particles fall from the body to the ground as a person walks, creating a trail the dogs can follow. When someone gets into a car and the car drives away, the trail ends at the point of entry. The dogs can't follow exhaust fumes. So Lindsay got into a car, or was put into one. On a street in McCleary, Washington, on a summer evening, in front of however many houses lined that block, and nobody noticed. But here's what makes that even harder to accept. If a strange vehicle had been parked or idling on that street, in that town, on that evening, someone would have seen it. McCleary is too small and too observant for an unfamiliar car to sit unnoticed on a residential block during the social hour of a summer night, which means either the vehicle arrived and departed with surgical speed, pulling up, collecting Lindsay, and driving away in a window of seconds, or the vehicle wasn't unfamiliar. It belonged to someone the town already knew, someone whose truck parked on that street wouldn't raise a single eyebrow. Investigators leaned hard into that second possibility. In October of 2011, law enforcement executed high-profile search warrants at the home, business, and storage unit of a person of interest. And here's the detail that will sit in the back of your mind once you hear it. This person's business was located directly on the walking route Lindsay would have taken to get home. Directly on it. Not a block over, not around the corner. Right there, on the path between point A and point B. Which means Lindsay didn't need to be pulled into a vehicle at all, at least not initially. She just needed to be pulled through a door. One step off the sidewalk, into an adjacent structure, and she's invisible. The line of sight is broken, the screaming is muffled, the neighbors see nothing because there's nothing to see, just a girl walking past a building. She's walked past 100 times before, and this time, she doesn't come out the other side. Surveillance footage from a local convenience store that night showed a white truck and an unidentified male that investigators flagged as anomalous to the town's normal evening traffic. The truck and the driver were plastered across the news. Despite national media coverage, despite the footage being shown on every major network, the driver was never identified. In a town where everyone knows everyone, a man and a truck that nobody recognized appeared on the night a child vanished and then dissolved back into nothing. For 8 years, the assumption was that whoever took Lindsay was local, that she was hidden somewhere in or near McCleary, and in the vast timber that surrounds the town, in a crawl space, in a ravine, somewhere within the immediate geography of this small, grieving community. In September of 2017, that assumption was obliterated. Hunters working in a remote, rugged section of eastern Washington, the dry, high desert side of the state, the side separated from McCleary by the entire width of the Cascade Range, stumbled upon human remains in steep, heavily wooded terrain. The kind of terrain you don't find unless you already know it's there. The kind of place where you have to hike in, where there are no trails, no signage, no reason for a casual visitor to ever set foot. The FBI crime lab identified the remains. It was Lindsay. Now, think about the logistics of this. McCleary sits in western Washington, near the coast. The location where Lindsay's remains were found is over 300 miles east, across mountain passes, through national forests, and deep into a landscape that looks and feels like a completely different state. Whoever took Lindsay didn't just kill her and hide her in the local woods. They put her in a vehicle, drove her across the entire state of Washington, a journey of 5 or 6 hours, navigated major highways and mountain roads without being stopped or noticed, and deposited her remains in a location so remote that it took 8 years and a pair of hunters to find them. That's not panic. That's not a crime of opportunity followed by a frantic disposal. That is someone who knew exactly where they were going. Someone who had been to that remote eastern Washington location before, probably many times. Someone who had the logistical capability, the vehicle reliability, and the confidence to make a cross-state drive with a missing child, while every law enforcement agency in the region was actively searching for her. The Grays Harbor County Sheriff called the perpetrator a monster. He wasn't being dramatic. The word fits. And that's the paradox that has haunted this case for 16 years. On one hand, everything about the abduction itself screams local. The 4-block route, the business on the walking path, the scent trail ending on a residential street, the white truck that nobody could identify but that clearly belonged in the environment. This was someone who knew McCleary, who knew Lindsay's routine, who knew which door to pull her through and which moment to do it. But the disposal screams outsider, or at least someone with a life that extended far beyond McCleary's borders. Someone with deep familiarity with the remote wilderness of eastern Washington, the kind of knowledge you don't pick up from a map, the kind you earn by spending years hunting, logging, or working in that terrain. Both of those things can be true at once. A person can live in a small town and know the back roads of the eastern mountains. A logger, a trucker, a seasonal worker, someone whose daily life placed them on that 4-block stretch of McCleary sidewalk and whose past or profession placed them in the steep forests 300 miles away. Finding Lindsay answered the question everyone had been asking for 8 years. She wasn't alive. She wasn't hidden in someone's basement. She wasn't raised under a different name in a different state. She was gone, and she had been gone since that warm June evening. But the discovery didn't solve the mystery. It deepened it. Because now the question isn't just who took a 10-year-old girl off a 4-block walk in a town where everyone knows everyone. It's also who had the knowledge, the nerve, and the sheer operational discipline to drive her 300 miles across a mountain range and hide her in terrain so remote that even hunters almost missed her. That person is still out there. Indeed, they've been out there for 16 years, and the walk between Lindsay Baum's friend's house and her own front door, 4 blocks, 10 minutes, broad twilight, remains one of the shortest, most baffling distances in the history of American crime. She should have been home before the streetlights came on. She almost was. I want you to close your eyes for a second and remember what a bowling alley felt like in the late 1990s. Not a modern boutique lanes and cocktails place, a real bowling alley. The kind with sticky carpet and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and that specific smell, shoe disinfectant and nacho cheese and stale cigarette smoke baked into the ceiling tiles. The kind where the arcade section in the back was louder than the lanes themselves, and a wall of cabinet games flashing and beeping and daring you to spend another quarter. Now, fill it with people. It's Saturday night. Every lane is booked. Families, teenagers on dates, birthday parties, league bowlers. The crash of pins sounds like a drum roll that never stops. There's music playing over the PA system, but you can barely hear it over the conversations and the laughter and the arcade cabinets shrieking their attract mode jingles on full volume. Kids are running between the lanes and the snack bar. Adults are moving in every direction. The visual field is cluttered. Game cabinets blocking sight lines, structural pillars chopping the room into segments, people standing and sitting and crossing paths constantly. This is New Frontier Lanes, Center Street, Tacoma, Washington, January 23, 1999. A Saturday night. The place is packed to capacity. And somewhere inside this wall of noise and light and human chaos, a 2-year-old girl was lifted off the ground and carried out the door, and not a single person in that building saw it happen. Her name was Teekah Lewis. She was 2 years old, and she has never been seen again. Let me tell you about Teekah, because she matters more than the mystery. Teekah Lewis was 2. Just barely 2, a toddler still navigating the world at knee height, still figuring out how stairs worked, still small enough to be carried on a hip without anyone thinking twice about it. She was Black and Native American, with bright, curious eyes and the kind of energy that 2-year-olds have when everything in the universe is brand new and fascinating. She had asthma and severe allergies, which meant she needed her medications and her inhaler and the constant attentive presence of her mother, Teresa Chapiewski, who managed her care with the practiced vigilance of a parent who knows her child's lungs can betray her at any moment. On the night she vanished, Teekah was wearing clothes you'd remember: a green Tweety Bird t-shirt, white sweatpants, and a pair of red, white, and black Air Jordan sneakers that were probably too cool for a 2-year-old, but that's the kind of thing a loving family does. They dress their baby fly because it makes everybody smile. Teekah wasn't at New Frontier Lanes alone. She was there with her extended family. This was a group outing: her mother, her aunts, her uncles, the whole crew. A normal Saturday night. The kind of evening you don't think about twice, the kind that's supposed to end with a sleepy toddler carried to the car and buckled into a car seat and driven home to bed. It didn't end that way. The evening unfolded the way every family bowling night unfolds. People took turns, people talked, people ate bad nachos and drank pitchers of soda. Teekah, like every toddler in the history of bowling alleys, was not interested in watching adults knock down pins. She was interested in the arcade. Specifically, she was fascinated by one of those sit-down driving games, the kind with the little steering wheel and the screen that shows a cartoon road. She didn't have the coordination to actually play it, but she loved sitting in the seat, grabbing the wheel, and pretending. The arcade section was right there, feet away from the lanes, within the sightline of the family, or at least within what should have been the sightline. In a place like this, with this many people, sightline is a generous term. Your view is constantly interrupted. Someone walks in front of you. A group of teenagers clusters around a game cabinet. A pillar blocks the angle. You look up and your kid is right there, and you look up again 30 seconds later and they've drifted 6 feet to the left and you have to crane your neck to find them. It's the nature of the environment. It's not negligence, it's physics. Around 10:30 p.m., Teresa stepped up to take her turn bowling. The physical act requires you to face the pins, to walk to the line, to focus on your throw. You turn your back on the concourse. It's not a choice. It's the geometry of the game. You face the lane, you bowl, you turn around. She turned around. The driving game was empty. Teekah was gone. The next few minutes were pure adrenaline and terror. Teresa called Teekah's name, then she shouted it. Family members fanned out through the building, checking between the game cabinets. Checking the bathrooms, checking under tables, checking behind the snack bar. A 2-year-old can't have gone far. She's probably just wandered to a different game. She's probably just around the corner. She wasn't around the corner. She wasn't in the bathroom. She wasn't at the snack bar. She wasn't anywhere inside New Frontier Lanes. Police were called. Officers arrived and locked down the building, but the critical minutes had already passed. In the time it took for the family to search, for panic to escalate, for someone to find a phone and dial 911, and for patrol cars to respond, the window had opened and closed. Whoever took Teekah had walked out of that bowling alley and into the Tacoma night with a 2-year-old child, and by the time anyone was looking at the parking lot was just a parking lot. Now, let's talk about what it actually takes to kidnap a toddler from the inside of a packed public building. Because the logistics of this crime are what make it so difficult to process. A 2-year-old is not a passive object. You don't just pick one up like a bag of groceries and walk calmly to the exit. Toddlers have opinions, loud, unfiltered, physically expressed opinions. If a stranger, someone whose face and smell and voice are unfamiliar, reaches down and picks up a 2-year-old, the default response is not cooperation. It's screaming. It's thrashing. It's arching the back and kicking and producing the kind of high-pitched, piercing wail that every parent in a 100-foot radius instinctively snaps their head toward. So how did this happen in silence? One possibility is speed and concealment. Teekah weighed 35 pounds. She was 3 feet tall. A large adult could scoop her up, press her against their chest, and drape a jacket or a coat over her in a single motion. If they moved quickly enough, if they timed it to coincide with a crash of pins or a burst of arcade noise, and if they walked with the body language of a parent carrying a tired child, which is exactly what it would look like from the outside, they could potentially cross the floor and reach an exit before anyone registered what they were seeing. But potentially is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because this person didn't just have to pick Teekah up. They had to navigate through a crowded room full of people, pass through a door or a hallway, cross a parking lot, reach a vehicle, put the child inside, and drive away, all without Teekah producing a single sound, loud enough to make one person out of hundreds turn their head and think, "That's not right." The window was impossibly small. Teresa's back was turned for seconds, maybe a minute, maybe 2 at the outside, which means the person who took Teekah wasn't browsing the arcade, casually deciding to commit a crime of opportunity. They were ready, or they were positioned. They had identified Teekah, they had tracked the family's attention patterns, they had mapped the exit route, and they were waiting, with the patience and the predatory focus of someone who had done this before, or who had been thinking about doing it for a very long time, for the exact fraction of a second when every set of eyes in that family looked somewhere else. That's not a crime of opportunity. That's a hunt. And there's evidence this wasn't the first hunt at New Frontier Lanes. During the investigation, witnesses came forward with something deeply unsettling. In the weeks leading up to January 23rd, multiple people reported seeing unfamiliar men behaving strangely at and around the bowling alley. Men who seemed to be watching children, men who lingered near the arcade section without playing any games, without bowling, without appearing to be there for any recreational purpose. Men who followed children toward exits and then peeled away when adults noticed. New Frontier Lanes, it appeared, had become a hunting ground, and nobody realized it until it was too late. The most specific description came from a witness who was inside the bowling alley on the night Teekah vanished. This witness described a white male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, with brown curly hair, a mustache, and a detail that seared itself into the investigation. Severe pockmarks on his face, deep acne scarring, the kind of facial feature that's distinctive enough to identify someone across a room. This man was seen inside the bowling alley that night, actively following a child toward an exit, not casually walking in the same direction, following, tracking, demonstrating the exact predatory behavior that the pre-incident reports had described in the weeks prior. And then there's the car. Multiple witnesses reported a vehicle peeling out of the New Frontier Lanes parking lot immediately after the abduction window. A maroon, late 1980s or early 1990s Pontiac Grand Am, tinted windows, rear spoiler. The car was moving fast, fast enough to draw attention, fast enough to make people look, fast enough to suggest that whoever was behind the wheel was not leaving casually. They were fleeing. The tinted windows are the detail that lingers. Because if you've just put a screaming, thrashing 2-year-old into the back seat of a car in a public parking lot, the one thing you absolutely need is for nobody to be able to see inside. Tinted windows turn a vehicle into a sealed box. The moment that car door closed, Teekah was invisible. The pockmarked man was never identified. The maroon Pontiac Grand Am was never found. Both vanished from the investigative record as completely as Teekah vanished from that arcade. For 26 years, Teekah's mother, Teresa, has held vigils. She has appeared on camera, on podcasts and newspapers, begging for information. She has returned to the site where New Frontier Lanes once stood and spoken her daughter's name into the empty air. She has aged up photographs generated, imagining what Teekah might look like at 10, at 15, at 20. She has never stopped looking, and the case has never stopped producing strange turns. A prime person of interest, someone who was extensively interviewed by authorities in connection with the abduction, recently died. Investigators have acknowledged publicly that this person's death may have loosened the tongues of people who were previously silenced by fear. In early 2025, 26 years after Teekah vanished, Tacoma police conducted a sudden targeted excavation of a residential backyard on South Gunnison Street. They brought in heavy equipment, they dug. They confirmed publicly that the dig was directly connected to Teekah's cold case. They haven't announced what they found, or what they didn't find. The case remains open. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. Teekah's mother was right there, 10 feet away, maybe less, in a building full of people, under bright lights, surrounded by noise and witnesses, and all the things that are supposed to make a place safe. And it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Because the person who took Teekah had already done the math. They knew the noise would cover the sound. They knew the crowd would block the view. They knew the chaos was camouflage. They had turned every single thing that made New Frontier Lanes feel like a safe, fun, family place into a tactical advantage. A 2-year-old girl in a Tweety Bird shirt, sitting behind a plastic steering wheel, pretending to drive. And in the time it took her mother to pick up a bowling ball, walk to the line, and roll it down the lane, someone erased her from the world. Teekah Lewis would be 28 years old today. There is someone in the Tacoma area, or someone who once lived in the Tacoma area, who knows exactly what happened in that bowling alley on January 23, 1999. Someone who saw the pockmarked man, someone who saw the maroon Pontiac, someone who has been carrying this for over a quarter century. The arcade games are gone, the bowling alley is gone. The neon lights have been dark for years, but the question is still there, blinking in the silence like a screen waiting for another quarter. Where is Teekah Lewis? If you've never been to the Puyallup Fair, let me try to give you a sense of scale. This is not your county fair with a Ferris wheel and a pie contest. The Washington State Fair, which everyone in the Pacific Northwest still calls the Puyallup, because that's what they've always called it, is one of the largest fairs in the entire United States. Over 1 million people pass through its gates every September. 1 million. The fairgrounds sprawl across acres of flat land in the shadow of Mount Rainier, packed with livestock barns, exhibition halls, concert stages, and an enormous midway where the rides spin and tilt and scream against the autumn sky. During the day, it's a family place. Cotton candy and funnel cakes and kids dragging their parents toward the tilt-a-whirl. But as the sun drops and the temperature falls and the neon lights take over, the atmosphere shifts. The families thin out. The teenagers take ownership of the midway. The crowds become denser, louder, more anonymous. Carnival workers lean out of game booths hollering at passers-by. The air smells like diesel fuel and grease and popcorn. The noise is relentless, mechanical screaming from the rides, distorted pop music blaring from every direction, the dull roar of thousands of conversations layered on top of each other until it all becomes one wall of sound. By 9 or 10 o'clock on a September evening, the Puyallup Fair is a labyrinth, a maze of shadows and strangers and flashing lights where you can lose sight of the person standing next to you just by turning your head. On the night of September 17th, 1992, a 14-year-old girl named Misty Copsy walked into that labyrinth. She never walked out. Misty Copsy was a completely normal Pacific Northwest teenager. 14 years old, blonde hair, hazel eyes, a mole under her right eye, and a scar under her right knee. She was into grunge music. This was 1992, which means Nirvana and Pearl Jam and flannel shirts were the entire world if you were a kid in Washington State. She was close with her mother, Diana Smith, a single mom who worked hard and worried about her daughter the way all single mothers worry, with a love that's always threaded through with a low hum of anxiety about all the things you can't control. Misty had zero history of running away. None. No pattern of sneaking out. No secret boyfriend in another city. No stash of hidden money. No packed bag under the bed. She was a teenager who sometimes argued with her mom, because that's what 14-year-olds do. but the baseline of the relationship was strong, stable, and communicative. That last part matters. It matters enormously. Because when Misty disappeared, the first thing the police did was label her a runaway. And that decision, that lazy, reflexive, devastating decision, may have cost Misty her life. She's September 17th. Misty and her best friend spend the evening at the fair. They ride rides, they eat junk food, they do exactly what two teenage girls are supposed to do at the biggest event of the year. It's loud and thrilling and cold and perfect. But as the evening winds down, Misty hits a problem. She's supposed to catch a specific Pierce Transit bus at 8:40 p.m. to get back to her home in Spanaway. It's a planned departure. She has the route figured out. And she knows which bus and she knows what time. She misses it. We don't know why. Maybe she lost track of time. Maybe the walk from the midway to the bus stop took longer than she thought. Maybe she got turned around in the crowd. Whatever the reason, at 8:40 p.m., the bus pulls away without her, and Misty Copsy is stranded at the Puyallup Fairgrounds as the night gets darker and colder and the crowd starts thinning into strangers. Around 8:45, she finds a payphone and calls her mother. She tells Diana she missed the bus. She says she's going to try to find another ride or catch the next transit bus. Diana tells her to hurry home. The conversation is normal, routine, a minor logistical hiccup on a fun night out. That phone call is the last time Diana Smith ever hears her daughter's voice. Misty never made it home. She never caught another bus. She never called again. She walked away from that payphone into the dissolving crowd of the Puyallup Fair, and she vanished. And Diana knew immediately. Every parent has that internal alarm, that gut-level frequency that vibrates when something crosses the line between late and wrong. Misty was a kid who came home. She called when she was going to be late. She coordinated plans. When midnight passed and the phone stayed silent, Diana called the police, and the police told her Misty was probably a runaway. Let's sit with that for a second. A mother calls to report that her 14-year-old daughter, a girl with no history of running away, no resources, no destination, who had called home just hours earlier to coordinate her ride, has not returned from a massive public event attended by 100,000 strangers. And the institutional response is, she probably left on purpose. She'll come back when she's ready. They didn't search the fairgrounds. They didn't interview witnesses. They didn't pull security footage. They didn't canvass the bus routes or the surrounding neighborhoods. They didn't treat it as what it was, a missing child alone at night in a sea of strangers. The first 48 hours of a missing persons case are the most critical window for recovery. In Misty's case, those 48 hours were spent with the police filing paperwork for a runaway and Diana Smith screaming into a void. Now, let's dismantle the runaway theory, because it doesn't survive contact with a single piece of evidence. A teenager who is planning to run away does certain things. She saves money. She packs a bag. She takes her favorite clothes, her personal items, the things that define her identity. She arranges a destination, a contact, some kind of plan, even a bad one. She doesn't call her mother from a payphone at 8:45 p.m. to discuss bus schedules. She doesn't leave her toothbrush on the bathroom sink and her makeup on the dresser and every piece of clothing she owns hanging in the closet. Misty had no money. She had no bag. She had no plan. She had a return bus ticket she'd already missed and a phone call to her mom that ended with, "I'll be home soon." That is not the profile of a girl who is disappearing on purpose. That is the profile of a girl who is trying to get home and can't. But here's where the runaway theory doesn't just weaken. It collapses entirely. Nearly 5 months later, on February 7th, 1993, a small private search party organized by Diana was combing the area around State Route 410, a highway corridor that runs east from Puyallup toward the Cascade foothills. In a muddy roadside ditch near Waco Road in the Mud Mountain Dam, they found a pair of jeans, underwear, shoes, and a single sock. The clothes were caked in mud. They'd been out there for months, met exposed to rain and wind and cold. They were rolled up and crumpled, not folded, not placed, discarded. 2 weeks later, about half a mile further along the same stretch of highway, they found Misty's hair pick and her toothbrush. These were Misty's clothes, her jeans, her underwear. Now apply logic. If a 14-year-old girl runs away from home to start a new life, she does not strip off her jeans and underwear and throw them into a ditch on the side of a rural highway. That's not running away. That's evidence of an assault. That's evidence of a crime committed against her body, followed by a disposal, a killer or an assailant dumping the clothing in a location they believed was remote enough to avoid detection. And the location itself. It wasn't random. South, the stretch of Route 410 where Misty's clothes were found sits within a 10-minute walk of the locations where the remains of two other murdered teenage girls, Kimberly DeLange and Anna Chebetnoy, had been discovered in prior years. Two other girls. Same age range, same general corridor, same type of remote wooded disposal site. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. That's a geographic comfort zone, the kind of area a repeat offender returns to because he knows the terrain, knows the sight lines, knows where the road crews don't go and where the brush is thick enough to hide what he needs to hide. And then there's the confession that wasn't quite a confession. A primary person of interest in Misty's case was a man named Reuben Schmidt. Investigators focused on Schmidt early and hard, and for good reason. According to multiple witnesses, Schmidt told people he knew exactly where Misty's body was. Beatty said it was located precisely 6 miles from where her clothes were found. 6 miles. Not somewhere out there, not in the woods, a specific measured distance. And when investigators checked the map, that 6-mile radius landed squarely on Schmidt's grandmother's farm, the exact location where Schmidt claimed to have been on the morning after Misty vanished. He placed himself at a location that he also identified as the location of the body. The geographic math aligned perfectly. But despite this, despite polygraph examinations, despite the circumstantial web tightening around him, authorities said they lacked enough physical evidence to bring charges. And the physical evidence that did exist, some of it was destroyed. When investigators initially processed Misty's recovered jeans, they found 3 small red paint chips embedded in the fabric. Paint chips are forensic gold. They can be matched to a specific vehicle, a specific workspace, a specific industrial environment. They are the kind of evidence that links a victim to a suspect's world. 3 tiny red flakes that could have told investigators exactly which car or which building Misty's jeans had been in contact with. Those paint chips were lost, misplaced in evidence handling, gone. An irreversible failure of chain of custody that eliminated what might have been the single strongest physical link between Misty Copsy and whoever took her. And in 2009, when advanced DNA testing was finally performed on the recovered jeans, the results confirmed what Diana had been saying for 17 years. The DNA found on the jeans did not belong to Misty. It belonged to an unidentified male. A man whose genetic profile is sitting in a database right now, matching nothing, connected to no one. A ghost in the system who left his DNA on a dead girl's jeans and has never been held accountable. Here's what happened to Misty Copsy. She missed a bus, that's it. That's the entire margin between a normal night and a nightmare. She was 14 years old, alone, at a massive public event that was emptying out into the dark. The temperature was dropping, the crowd was thinning, the carnival lights were shutting off, and she needed a ride. The Puyallup Fair in September of 1992 had over 100,000 people passing through on any given day. In that ocean of faces, there were families and teenagers and retirees and carnival workers and, statistically, fast inevitably, predators. People who go to events like this specifically because the crowd provides cover, because a stranded kid is easier to approach than one surrounded by family, because offering a ride to a shivering teenager outside a fairground at 9:30 at night doesn't look predatory. It looks like a favor. All it took was one person, one car, one offer. Hey, do you need a ride? And a 14-year-old who was cold and tired and just wanted to get home said yes to the wrong person. And because the police decided she was a runaway, nobody started looking for the right person until the trail was frozen solid. Diana Smith fought for her daughter for the rest of her life. She organized search parties, she confronted police, She went on television. She told anyone who would listen that Misty was not a runaway, that something terrible had happened, that the system had failed her child in the most fundamental way a system can fail. In 2017, 25 years after Misty vanished, the Puyallup Police Department finally acknowledged what Diana had been saying all along. They reclassified the case as an unsolved homicide and abduction. They even launched a social media campaign, writing posts in Misty's voice, trying to generate new leads from a new generation. It was the right thing to do, and it was 25 years too late. Misty Copsy had a mole under her right eye and a scar under her right knee. She liked grunge music. She loved her mom. She went to the fair on a September night and missed her bus by a few minutes, and those few minutes became the rest of her life. Her jeans were found in a ditch on a highway known for harboring the remains of murdered girls. An unknown man's DNA was on them. Red paint chips that might have solved the case were lost by the people who were supposed to protect the evidence. And a man told witnesses he knew exactly where she was buried. I gave a distance that matched his own grandmother's property and was never charged. Diana always said the same thing. Everybody knows who did it. Maybe she was right. Maybe the answer has been sitting in that small community for over 30 years, protected by silence and circumstance, and a system that looked at a missing 14-year-old girl and decided she wasn't worth the paperwork. Misty Copsy is still missing. The fair still comes to Puyallup every September. The lights still spin. The crowd still roars. And somewhere along State Route 410, the woods are still keeping their secret. Tomorrow's your birthday. You're turning 5. You probably don't fully understand what that means, but you know it's important. You know there's going to be cake. You know people are going to sing to you. You know that tomorrow, the whole world, or at least the small, warm, familiar world of your family's house, is going to revolve around you. You're 4 years old tonight, and tonight is the last night of being 4, and everything is exciting and normal and safe. Sophia Juarez went to bed that night with all of that ahead of her. The cake, the candles, the singing, the presents. She was 1 sleep away from turning 5. She never got there. On the evening of February 4th, 2003, Sophia walked out of her family's front door in Kennewick, Washington, took a few steps down her own driveway, and disappeared. Not into the woods, not into a crowd, into a quiet residential street on a cold Tuesday night, not in the handful of seconds it took for a car to pull away from the curb. The response was unprecedented. Sophia Juarez became the subject of the first Amber Alert ever issued in the state of Washington. Her name and face were broadcast across highway signs and television screens and radio stations from Seattle to Spokane. A system designed to mobilize an entire state was activated for the first time in its history, all for one little girl in a pink jacket on the eve of her birthday. It wasn't enough. Sophia has never been found. Let's talk about the setting, because the geography of this crime is what makes it so hard to accept. Kennewick sits in the Tri-Cities area of eastern Washington, the dry side of the state, where the landscape flattens into brown hills and irrigated farmland, and the Columbia River cuts wide and slow through the desert. It's a blue-collar town, working families, modest homes, the kind of neighborhood where people park their trucks in the driveway and leave the garage door open while they mow the lawn. The 100 block of East 15th Avenue, where Sophia's family lived, wasn't glamorous. Residents described it as a rougher part of town, not dangerous exactly, but not the kind of street where you'd want a small child walking alone after dark. But it was home. It was familiar. It was the world Sophia knew. The house itself was full. Sophia lived with her 20-year-old mother, Maria, her grandmother, her grandmother's boyfriend, and 6 aunts and uncles. A crowded household, a lot of bodies moving through a small space, the kind of domestic environment where it's easy to assume someone else is watching the kid because someone is always around. On the evening of February 4th, the sun was long gone by 8 o'clock. It was cold. Winter cold, eastern Washington cold, the kind of dry, the biting chill that makes you pull your collar up and walk faster. The streets were quiet. Families were inside. porch lights threw small circles of yellow onto empty sidewalks. This is the world Sophia stepped into when she walked out the front door. Here's what happened. As best as investigators have been able to reconstruct it, Sophia was inside the house playing in her bedroom. Sometime around 8 o'clock, her grandmother's boyfriend decided to walk to a nearby convenience store. Sophia wanted to go with him. She loved little outings like that. The walk, the bright lights of the store, maybe a piece of candy. But he told her no. It was cold and dark and late, and he headed out alone. Now, Sophia was described by everyone who knew her as shy. Not the kind of kid who bolted out the door on her own. Not adventurous in the reckless, boundary-testing way some children are. She was quiet, she was cautious, and she generally stayed close to the adults she trusted. So what happened next was a significant deviation from her normal behavior, the kind of deviation that only a 4-year-old's logic can explain. She slipped out the front door, quietly, without telling anyone, with a single dollar bill tucked in her pocket, maybe allowance money, maybe a coin she'd found, the kind of small treasure a child holds onto for days. And she began walking down the driveway, following in the direction the boyfriend's car had gone, trying to catch up to him on his walk to the store. He didn't know she was behind him. He had no idea. At approximately 9:15 p.m., a relative spotted Sophia walking westbound on East 15th Avenue toward South Washington Street. Just walking. A tiny 4-year-old girl, alone in the dark on a cold February night, heading toward the corner store. That is the last confirmed sighting of Sophia Juarez. By 9:45, the boyfriend returned home from the store. The family realized Sophia wasn't in the house. She wasn't in the yard. She wasn't on the porch. Panic hit instantly. They searched the immediate area, calling her name into the dark. Nothing. They called the police, and to the Kennewick Police Department's enormous credit, the response was immediate. Officers were on scene within 3 minutes of the call. 3 minutes. There was no dismissal. No, she probably wandered off. Did give it a few hours. They recognized instantly that a 4-year-old girl alone on a dark street in February was a maximum severity emergency, and they treated it as exactly that. Within hours, Sophia's face was on every screen in the state. The first Amber Alert in Washington history lit up the highways. But Sophia was already gone. Now. Let's talk about the window of time, because this is where the math stops making sense. Sophia left the house sometime between 8 and 9:15. The boyfriend left shortly before her. A relative saw her walking on the street at 9:15. The boyfriend returned at 9:45, and the alarm was raised almost immediately. That gives us a window of roughly 30 minutes, from the last sighting to the moment people started looking. In an abduction scenario, 30 minutes is an eternity. It's enough time to put a child in a vehicle and drive 15-20 miles in any direction. By the time the Amber Alert was activated and patrol cars were fanning out, the radius of possibility had already ballooned into something enormous. But let's narrow the window further. Sophia was spotted walking on the street at 9:15. She was 4 years old, moving at 4-year-old speed, on a short residential block. The distance between her house and the corner of South Washington Street is not far. Whatever happened to her happened within minutes of that sighting, maybe less. Which means whoever took her was already there, already positioned, already watching. And that's where the van comes in. An eyewitness came forward with a description that has haunted this case for over 2 decades. This witness, described by police as highly credible, reported seeing a Hispanic juvenile male approach Sophia on the sidewalk. The witness estimated the boy's age at 11 to 14 years old. He had a round baby face. He was chubby. He had greased and wavy hair with bangs falling over his forehead. And the witness noted one detail that didn't fit the rest of the picture. His hands were disproportionately large for his apparent age. But it's what the witness saw happening between this boy and Sophia that makes your stomach turn. Sophia was crying. She was visibly distressed, being led away from the direction of her home. And the boy, this child, this middle schooler, was laughing. Leading a crying 4-year-old by the hand down a dark street, but laughing while she wept. The boy was seen guiding Sophia toward a specific vehicle, a light blue, silver, or gray full-sized panel van, a 1970s or 1980s model. No side windows. The kind of blank-paneled work van you'd see at a construction site or a painting job. The kind of vehicle specifically designed so that nobody can see what's inside. The van was parked on a side street, idling, waiting. Think about the implications of that for a second. A van with no windows was parked on a residential street near Sophia's home on the exact evening she happened to walk outside alone. A juvenile was deployed to approach her, take her by the hand, and lead her to that vehicle. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This wasn't a stranger who happened to spot a child and made an impulsive, terrible decision. This was coordinated. There was a driver in that van. There was a boy on the sidewalk. And there was a 4-year-old girl who walked out her front door at exactly the wrong moment. Or exactly the right moment if someone had been watching the house long enough to know the rhythms. For 18 years, the case sat in that terrible holding pattern familiar to families of missing children, the space between knowing something happened and knowing what happened. Over 225 tips poured in. Investigators followed every thread. Some leads pointed toward a hit-and-run theory that Sophia, now small and dressed in dark clothing, was accidentally struck by a vehicle driven by panicked individuals who disposed of her body rather than face the consequences. Rumored locations included Hover Park and a bluff called Jump Off Joe. Other leads whispered about something darker, that Sophia was taken deliberately by someone connected to the extended family's past, trafficked south across the border into Mexico, absorbed into a different life under a different name. And then, in 2021, the internet did what the internet does. A TikTok video went viral. It had been filmed in Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico, and it showed a young woman in what appeared to be a rehabilitation facility. She was unstable, emotional, clearly struggling. And she said something that made millions of people stop scrolling. She claimed she had been kidnapped as a child. She said she didn't know her real identity, and she said she hated birthdays. She hated birthdays. The physical resemblance to age-progressed images of Sophia was striking. The timeline worked. The geography, Mexico, the border, the trafficking rumors that had followed this case for years, aligned. The internet erupted. Amateur sleuths dissected every frame of the video. News outlets picked it up. For a few breathless weeks, it felt like the case might actually break open. Kennewick police tracked the woman down. DNA was collected and tested. The results came back definitive. The woman was not Sophia Juarez. The lead collapsed, the hope deflated, and the case returned to where it had been for 2 decades. A quiet residential street in Kennewick, a panel van with no windows, and a boy with big hands leading a crying girl into the dark. Here's what stays with me about this case. Sophia Juarez didn't disappear from a chaotic fairground or a crowded mall or a vast stretch of wilderness. She disappeared from her own driveway, from the threshold between her front door and the street, from the few yards of concrete that separated inside, where her birthday decorations were probably already hung, where the cake was probably already planned, from outside, where the night was cold and dark and hiding something terrible. She took a few steps. That's all. A few steps that any 4-year-old might take, following someone she loved toward a store she wanted to visit, with a dollar bill in her pocket and a birthday to look forward to. The Kennewick Police Department responded in 3 minutes. They activated a system that had never been used before in the state's history. They did everything right, and it still wasn't fast enough because the van was already there, and the boy was already walking, and the door had already closed. The Amber Alert system that was born from Sophia's case has gone on to help recover hundreds of children across Washington state. It works. It saves lives. But it didn't save the girl it was named for, the girl who made it necessary, the girl who proved that a child can vanish from her own front yard in the time it takes to look away. Sophia Juarez would be 26 years old today. Somewhere, she either is or she isn't. And the family that was supposed to sing Happy Birthday on February 5th, 2003, has spent every February 5th since then blowing out candles for a chair that's always empty. She was 1 sleep away from turning 5. She never made it. November 24th, 1971. The night before Thanksgiving. Portland, Oregon. The weather is miserable, not dramatically miserable, not cinematic, just the wet, gray, bone-tired kind of miserable that the Pacific Northwest specializes in. A cold, persistent drizzle hangs in the air. The sky is a flat ceiling of cloud, so low you feel like you could reach up and touch it. Visibility is poor. The wind is steady but not violent. It's the kind of night where you pull your coat tighter and walk a little faster and don't look up. At the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter in Portland International Airport, a man approaches and purchases a one-way ticket to Seattle. He pays with cash, $20. He gives his name as Dan Cooper. He's unremarkable. Mid-40s, dark suit, white shirt, black clip-on tie, the kind of anonymous business attire that makes you invisible in an airport. He's wearing loafers. He's carrying a cheap attaché case, the kind a middle management salesman might haul to a regional conference. He boards the plane, settles into seat 18C, a middle seat in the back row, lights a Raleigh cigarette, and orders a bourbon and soda. He is calm. He is polite. He's about to commit the only unsolved airline hijacking in the history of American commercial aviation. Northwest Orient Flight 305 was a short hop, Portland to Seattle, 30 minutes in the air, give or take. A Boeing 727-100, which in 1971 was the workhorse of domestic aviation, a three-engine jet with a distinctive feature that would become very important very soon: a rear ventral air stair. A set of stairs built into the tail of the aircraft that could be lowered in flight. Most passengers didn't know this. Most pilots didn't think about it. But Dan Cooper knew. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a folded note to Florence Schaffner, a 23-year-old flight attendant working the aisle. And she assumed it was a phone number. She got them all the time, and dropped it into her purse without reading it. Cooper leaned across the empty seat beside him and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." She opened it. The note said he had a bomb in his briefcase and that she should sit next to him. When she did, Cooper calmly cracked open the cheap attaché case just enough for her to see inside. Red cylinders, wires, a battery. Whether it was a real explosive or a convincing prop, nobody ever found out, because nobody ever found the briefcase. Cooper's demands were specific. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency. 20s, nothing larger. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes, and 2 reserves. And he wanted a fuel truck standing by at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, ready to refuel the plane the moment it landed. The demands were relayed to the ground. The FBI scrambled. And here's the thing that sets Cooper apart from virtually every other hijacker in history. There was no panic, no screaming, no grandstanding. The passengers on Flight 305 had no idea anything was wrong. Cooper sat in the back row, sipping his bourbon, making polite conversation with the flight attendant, while the FBI assembled his money, photographed every serial number, and sourced 4 parachutes from a local skydiving school and a military facility. The plane circled over Puget Sound for 2 hours while the logistics were arranged. Cooper was patient. He was courteous. He tipped a flight attendant for the drink. At approximately 5:45 p.m., the plane landed at SeaTac. Cooper's instructions were precise. A single airline employee would deliver the money and the parachutes to the rear stairway. The cabin lights would be dimmed. No tricks. The exchange happened. And $200,000 in $20 bills, roughly 21 pounds of paper money, was handed over in a cloth bank bag, along with 4 parachutes. In return, Cooper released all 36 passengers and one of the flight attendants. They filed out the front of the aircraft and into the terminal, most of them still completely unaware that they had been hostages. Cooper kept the flight crew. He ordered the plane refueled and back in the air, with a very specific flight plan, heading south toward Mexico City via Reno, Nevada. Altitude no higher than 10,000 feet, airspeed no faster than 200 knots, roughly 230 miles per hour, landing gear down, wing flaps lowered at 15 degrees. These weren't random numbers. These were the exact parameters needed to keep the Boeing 727 flying at the lowest possible speed while maintaining stable flight, conditions that would make a parachute jump from the rear air stair survivable. Cooper knew the aircraft. He knew what it could do. He knew about the air stare, which was a vulnerability so obscure that even most pilots didn't think about it. The plane took off into the dark. At approximately 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the rugged, heavily forested wilderness of southwest Washington, the cockpit instruments registered a sudden change in air pressure. The aft air stare had been lowered. The crew felt the aircraft pitch slightly as weight shifted toward the tail. Then the oscillation stopped. The weight was gone. Dan Cooper, with $200,000 in cash strapped to his body, wearing a business suit and loafers, carrying a parachute he'd selected from the 4 provided, had walked down the rear stairway of a commercial jet airliner traveling at 200 miles per hour, 10,000 feet above pitch-black wilderness, and stepped off into the void. When the plane landed in Reno for its scheduled refueling stop, the rear stairs were down. They said the cabin was empty, and the only traces Cooper left behind were his clip-on tie, 2 of the 4 parachutes, and 8 cigarette butts. He was never seen again. Now. Let's talk about the jump, because this is where the legend of D.B. Cooper, and yes, the media got the name wrong. It was always Dan Cooper on the ticket, but a reporter's error turned him into D.B. and it stuck. This is where the legend collides with physics, and the collision is not pretty. The popular image of the Cooper jump is cinematic. A man leaping into a howling blizzard, ice pelting his face, wind screaming, a death-defying plunge through apocalyptic weather into the savage wilderness below. It makes a great movie, but the actual meteorological data from that night tells a more nuanced story. Ground-level observers near the projected drop zone reported conditions that were unpleasant but not extreme. Misty rain, light wind, temperatures in the low 40s. The violent storm was largely a media invention. The jump was survivable, from a weather standpoint at least, but from every other standpoint, it was borderline insane. Cooper jumped at night, not twilight, full dark, no moon, solid cloud cover. He could not have seen the ground. He could not have seen trees, rivers, clearings, power lines, or any of the obstacles that kill even experienced skydivers who jump in daylight over open fields. He jumped wearing a business suit, no helmet, no jumpsuit, no thermal gear, loafers, smooth-soled slip-on leather loafers that would provide 0 ankle support on a landing into uneven terrain. And then there are the parachutes. Cooper had 4 to choose from, 2 main canopies and 2 reserves. An experienced skydiver would have immediately identified the best civilian sport chute in the bunch, a steerable ram air canopy that would have given him the ability to navigate toward a clearing or a road. Cooper didn't take it. He selected a military surplus back parachute, a non-steerable round canopy that would drop him straight down with no directional control. Wherever the wind carried him, that's where he'd land. But here's the detail that has baffled investigators for over 50 years. One of the reserve parachutes he was given was a dummy, a training chute that had been intentionally sewn shut. It was clearly marked as non-functional. It was included in the batch because the FBI had sourced the chutes in a hurry and grabbed what was available. A professional skydiver would have identified it instantly and discarded it. Cooper took it, he strapped it to his chest, and the second reserve, the one that actually worked, he cut its shroud lines, pulled the cord free, and used it to tie the money bag shut. So here's the paradox. Cooper knew enough about the Boeing 727 to specify exact flight parameters that would make a rear stair jump survivable. That's specialized knowledge. That's not something you pick up from a magazine article. But he selected a non-steerable chute, strapped on a sewn-shut dummy, and destroyed a working reserve to use as rope. That's not expertise. And that's someone who understood aircraft but not parachutes, someone who knew how to get out of the plane but may not have known how to get to the ground alive. Was he a genius? Or was he a desperate man who executed a brilliant plan right up to the moment he stepped off that stairway and then fell 10,000 feet into the dark with no idea what he was doing? The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. They searched the projected drop zone. Hundreds of square miles of dense Pacific Northwest timber, steep ravines, and nearly impenetrable undergrowth. They brought in military helicopters, ground teams, tracking dogs. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. No parachute snagged in the trees, no body crumpled in a ravine, no briefcase, no shred of a business suit, no loafer. The forest gave back absolutely zero evidence that a man had fallen into it from 2 miles up. And that, in itself, is the mystery within the mystery. If Cooper died on impact, which is the FBI's official position, where is he? The Pacific Northwest wilderness is vast and unforgiving, but a man attached to a large nylon parachute canopy doesn't just dissolve. The chute alone would have been visible for years, draped over branches or tangled in the canopy. A body decomposes, but bones persist for decades, and 21 pounds of paper currency doesn't biodegrade overnight. If he's in those woods, the woods kept him hidden from the largest search operation the region had ever seen. And then, 9 years later, the case took its strangest turn. February 1980. A young boy named Brian Ingram is digging a fire pit on Teekah Bar, a sandy stretch along the north bank of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. His shovel hits something. He pulls out 3 packets of $20 bills, rotting and moldy but still held together by rubber bands. The serial numbers are checked against the FBI's master list. It's Cooper's money, nearly $6,000 of it. But here's the logic gap that has consumed researchers for 45 years. Teekah Bar is not in Cooper's projected drop zone. It's miles away, significantly downstream on the Columbia River from where the FBI calculated he would have landed based on the plane's flight path and speed. If Cooper died in the forest, how did his money travel miles through dense timber and end up buried under sand on a riverbank? The bills were found beneath layers of sediment, suggesting they had been there for some time, but the rubber bands were still intact, which argues against years of tumbling through a river current. Water would have separated loose bills and destroyed the bands long before depositing them in a neat bundled stack under sand. One theory says the money washed downstream naturally, that Cooper lost the bundle during the jump, and it eventually migrated through tributaries into the Columbia. But hydrologists have struggled to map a plausible water route from the drop zone to Teekah Bar that would keep bundled cash intact. Another theory says Cooper survived, landed near the river, and buried a portion of the money as a cache, intending to retrieve it later, and either couldn't or chose not to. But if he was alive and mobile enough to bury money on a riverbank, why bury only 6,000 of the 200,000? And why never come back for it? The money answered nothing. It only proved that at least some portion of the ransom made a journey that nobody can explain. The FBI officially suspended the Cooper investigation in 2016, redirecting resources to other priorities. They acknowledged they'd never identified him. They never found the rest of the money. They never found a body, a parachute, or a briefcase bomb. After 45 years, the file was closed, not solved, just closed. But the case didn't stop. It couldn't, because Dan Cooper left something behind that was more durable than money or evidence. He left behind a mystery so perfectly constructed that it resists every attempt at resolution. And he left behind his tie. That cheap black clip-on J.C. Penney tie that he removed before the jump and draped over the headrest of seat 18C. Decades later, amateur scientists put that tie under an electron microscope and found something astonishing. Over 100,000 microscopic particles embedded in the fabric, metallic particulates, and not just any metals, rare earth elements, cerium, strontium sulfide, and pure cold-rolled titanium. In 1971, pure titanium was not a common material. It was extraordinarily rare and almost exclusively associated with one industry: advanced aerospace manufacturing. Specifically, the Boeing Supersonic Transport Program, the SST, which was being developed in the Seattle area during exactly this period. The particles on Cooper's tie were consistent with someone who worked on or near a factory floor where titanium was being cut, shaped, and machined. Dan Cooper, whoever he was, likely wore that tie to work in an aerospace plant, possibly Boeing's own facility, a disgruntled aerospace engineer, a laid-off metallurgist, a man who understood the 727's air stare because he understood the 727 from the inside, because he'd helped build it, or something like it. Here's the image I want to leave you with. It's 8:13 p.m. on November 24th, 1971. A Boeing 727 is flying south through the darkness over southwest Washington at 10,000 feet. The rear air stair is open and the wind is roaring up through the belly of the aircraft at 200 miles per hour. Standing at the top of those stairs is a man in a rumpled business suit with a bag of money strapped to his chest and a non-steerable parachute on his back. Below him is nothing. No lights, no landmarks, just 10,000 feet of black, wet, freezing Pacific Northwest sky and a forest that has never given up its dead. He steps off. The stairs bounce once. The crew feels the plane shift, and then stillness. No one has ever been charged. No body has ever been found. No credible suspect has ever been confirmed. The only physical evidence that Dan Cooper ever existed is a clip-on tie dusted with titanium, 8 cigarette butts, and $6,000 rotting dollars buried on a riverbank 9 years after the fact. He is either at the bottom of a ravine somewhere in the Washington wilderness, his bones scattered by decades of weather and wildlife, or he walked out of those woods on Thanksgiving morning 1971, ditched the suit, and lived the rest of his life as someone the FBI never thought to look at. Either way, he got away with it. The only hijacker in American history who did. And the stairway door's still open.